Before we get into the greatest radio war of 2024, it is very important that I tell you just, like all wars, why it all started. Why did I, of all people, a Gen Zer, someone who grew up on the latter half of the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 generation, and of course the first half of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 generation, why did I want a Panasonic 3DO? Well, it's all about my upbringing. All right. Growing up, my brother and I, we always wanted an official console. But my dad, at the time, he wasn't really into spending a lot of money for presents for us, especially video games. And if we wanted him to invest in like a freaking table tennis set, he would have probably bought that for us. But a video game for that price at that time, absolutely not. So all that we got and all that we played for years as kids were knockoff consoles. All right. So if you know anything about the Sega Play Pals or Fun Stations, we had those. All right. Basically, we only had knockoff consoles, so we spent a lot of our time daydreaming, and we spent a lot of our time looking up older consoles, right? Because stuff like the Xbox, because basically everything was out of our reach, but we were most interested in stuff that was really, really out of our reach. Of course we wanted 360s and PS3s and Xbox One, stuff like that at the time, but given how extremely out of our reach that was, we would look back onto stuff like the NES, like the, of course, SNES, Genesis, 64, PlayStation, PS1, PS2, so on and so forth. And it's basically thanks to guys like Classic Game Room and the of course Angry Video Game Nerd. We watched those guys a lot, and they would mostly focus on retro consoles and retro gaming, and that's what we stayed fascinated in, basically for that time being, because we basically knew that we could not have it. He started to sway more to the modern gaming side, where he would focus more on those, but I stayed my head squarely into the past. I didn't really focus that much on the main consoles. I became more interested in the odd stuff, in the stuff that were considered failures, in the stuff that didn't last that long, like stuff like the Game Palm, the Sega Saturn, Sega Dreamcast, even the Master System to a certain extent. The Virtual Boy is something that I invested a lot of time researching in. The Atari Jaguar, the Atari Lynx is something that I was interested in. The TurboGrafx, which, saw some success in Japan and Europe, but did not really break over in the US, so I focused on that. Those like little oddities, those little in-between consoles, in-between games, always interested me the most. Right, and I was always like, man, if I ever got a chance to buy a console, those were the consoles that I would buy. Of course, I wanted the modern stuff as well, but those interested me the most because I guess a bit of their novelty, and because they're kind of left field, because they didn't do that well, because they are not as well known as your 360s and your Genesis and Game Gear. Well, yeah, Genesis, Game Gear, SNES, stuff like that. Because they didn't do that well, I was interested in them the most. Alright, and one that especially caught my eye at a young age was the Panasonic 3DO. Basically, the only credit that people would give to it would be stuff like Gex, of course, and your ever so odd game, your Killing Time, of course, was the next one that got mentioned a lot. Need for Speed, Road Rash, Super Street Fighter. But out of like 5 or 6 games, people would basically chalk it up to just trash and just something that you just, shouldn't waste your time investing in. But I was always fascinated by it, and I was like, man, one of these days I needed to get a 3DO. So fast forward about 12 years, I guess, 12 years, and here we are. I have a Panasonic 3DO in my room with about 13, 14, 15 games on it. And yeah, so I just got what I wanted. So that's why I always wanted a 3DO, because it was so out of my reach, and because I was just interested in having that experience for myself. So yeah, that's basically why I got it. Now that you know why I've always wanted a 3DO, let's get into the great 3DO war of 2024. Now, you've probably never heard of this war, Axia. You've probably never heard of a lot of wars. These wars go down on what is the most intense battlefield known to mankind, the most intense battlefield of all time. That battlefield is eBay, the eBay marketplace. Now, let's just set the scene here, alright? I've been looking for a 3DO for weeks, just going over all these numbers and seeing how expensive this console is. I am not willing to spend more than $200 for a console. All right, that's where I put the cap limit. But I'm just not finding anything good. You know, I just keep running into these stuff, and whenever I find something affordable, I'm like, oh man, this is the one for me. Check it out. For parts or not working. Each and every single one of them. There are so many units out there on eBay that you'll find for parts or just simply not working, and I was just getting bummed out, man. Like, you know, where can I find a decent 3DO system these days? Now, I happened upon what I thought was this diamond in the rough. No one is ever going to see this kind of thing, right? I saw a Panasonic 3DO system with 3 controllers and 21 games for the very low price of I cannot remember, but it was definitely under $100 at the time, plus shipping, right? And I was totally stoked. I'm like, oh wait, wow, let me just buy this up right now before anyone else notices. And that was my first time seeing a bid. It was the first time that I'd ever seen well, not a bid, but an auction. It was my first time seeing an auction on the eBay marketplace. I had no understanding of it, but I just knew that I wanted this console, so I'm gonna put some money up for it, right? At the time, it must have been fresh because it had 0 bids. All right, people are always lurking online, especially on eBay, for some good 3DO consoles. So yeah, it must have been pretty early, which is why it had 0 bids at the time. So I was the first bidder. I put up my money. It was less than $100, and you know, I'm just thinking in the back of my head, you know what? This thing's only got like a couple days left. It's got like 5 days left. So, you know, that's a pretty short time. I just gotta wait until the auction ends and collect my bounty, right? Now you're probably wondering, how sweet was the deal? Well, let me describe it all to you. Now, for that under $100, what you were getting was a Panasonic 3DO FZ1 console, which is the original one, the big one, right? So you're getting the FZ1 and 3 controllers, an original regular Panasonic 3DO controller, a Nitec controller, and the coveted Capcom Pad Soldier. Pretty sure that's what it's called. Not sure why they did. I'm still so puzzled. Why did they not just call it the Soldier Pad? Like, Soldier Pad sounds just fine, but let's get into the meat and potatoes, which is the 21 games. What were the 21 games that you were getting for under $100? Well, Off-World Interceptor, which is a pretty good game. I can say that from experience right now. Wing Commander 3, all 4 discs, of course. Guardian War, pretty much seen as the best RPG on the system. Theme Park, Samurai freaking Showdown, alright? If you know anything about the 3DO and fighting games, or just games in general for the 3DO, you know that Samurai Showdown is one of the prime pieces of cake on this system, bro. Samurai Showdown is so good on this system. I love that game on this system so much. And it is, you know, if you're searching online, especially for complete in-box or complete in jewel case, I should say, copies, this thing is expensive, bro. So you know that having this here is a pretty big deal. Alright, there's Samurai Showdown, there's Theme Park. Immercenary is a very interesting game, and surprisingly cheap as well. I've seen multiple copies online, some even complete in box, or I guess complete in jewel case, for like $30. I'm surprised it's not more sought after, but anyway. Also, you get classics like Way of the Warrior. You know, good to have it as a novelty item, but not good to have it as a game. Ballz, the director's cut. Gex, another classic. Killing Time, another classic. Road Rash, definitely a classic. Of course, what would be a 3DO collection without Super Street Fighter 2? Of course, Super Street Fighter 2. You're also getting Soccer Kid. I've seen mixed stuff about that game. Total Eclipse, seen mixed stuff about that too. There's Quarantine, which is a combat taxi game. Very interesting game. Road and Track presents Need for Speed, the first Need for Speed game. The 3DO was the first console to get a Need for Speed game, and that is a pretty big deal given how big of a franchise it turned out to be. Crash and Burn, of course, the first, very first 3DO game, came as a pack-in for many consoles, so people are pretty familiar with that as well. Burning Soldier, pretty sure that's a rail shooter. And Star Wars Rebel Assault, another rail shooter. There's also Poed, or Poed, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's a first-person shooter. Pebble Beach Golf, Lynx, and yeah, that's pretty much it there. So yeah, that's 21 games with a console and 3 controllers. And if you know anything about trying to get a 3DO from online, that is a damn good deal. None of the games were complete in box, but that's absolutely fine. I don't really require a complete inbox. It would be great to have a complete inbox, but you know, whatever. Not all of the 3DO games that I was looking for, but it had most of them that I was looking for, so that this would have been a really great deal to get. But you know, as we know, it did not work out that well for me. I was the first bidder. I put on the first bid. It had 5 days left. I knew absolutely nothing about 3DO auctions. It was my absolute first one. So I just put down my money and thought, you know, I'm the only person here. Who else is gonna miraculously come along, see this offer, and just outbid me? 1 day later, I was outbid. So I put up some more money. And then I got outbid again. More money. And 55 bids later. 55 bids, 7 bidders, and about 4 or 5 days later of blood, sweat, and tears on this marketplace battlefield. I was feeling the hurt. I was up at night hearing that dreaded eBay message sound. You know it if you have the eBay app on your phone. You know exactly how that sounds. I hear that almost every hour with a message saying that I had gotten outbid, and I put up just the inkling more money, and once it crossed $200, man, I just started to think to myself, like, man, you know, this isn't worth it, man. You know, this is just way too much money for me. So it got from 200 to like 250 to 300, and I'm like, you know what, man, 400 is the limit, right? Because I'm willing to spend up to $200 for a console, but you know, including games going all the way up to 400, I am not willing to spend that much money. I'm just gonna take my L, leave, let this guy, whoever he is, this absolute maniac that keeps spending, that keeps outbidding me, you know, let him have it. He obviously wants it more than I do, so just let him have it, walk away, buy a console for cheaper, right? So yeah, I walk away, and the end result, you know, the massacre ended up being 55 bids, 7 bidders over the course of about 4 or 5 days, and the console, along with the 3 controllers and 21 games, ultimately sold for $450. That's $430 for just the stuff and $20 shipping, right? So $450. And I'm thinking to myself afterwards, you know what, man, I dodged the bullet, because I would have kept going. No, knowing myself, I would have kept going if I did not stop myself, and I would have ended up spending some crazy amount of money on a Panasonic 3DO of all things, and I just, you know, that would just be some irresponsible spending on my part, right? So yeah, I got outbid, I took my L, and you know, at the time, I didn't feel too bad about it, you know, because it's like, you know, it would have just kept going higher and higher, and I would have just wasted all this money, you know, thinking that I would have wasted all this money, right? So it is what it is. Took my L, walked away. It is what it is, right? So moving on, I'm just thinking to myself, you know what, man, I dodged the bullet. I'm just gonna find a nice under $200 3DO console, buy the 5 or 6 games that I want, And that's gonna be it for me, man. And I won't have to spend $450 to get a 3DO and the 3DO experience that I've always wanted ever since I was a child, right? So I left with my head high and with these high hopes of finding this mysterious under 200 console. And yes, I did find it. I found what looked to be a pretty good 3DO console. I was looking for an FZ1, but once I did more research and I found out that the FZ10, I believe it's called, the second edition console that was made by Panasonic, the one with the top loader disc tray, that one actually allowed you to manage your storage to where, like, if it got too high, you would be able to actually go into its system and delete save files and stuff like that, so that you could have more space to save more games and stuff like that, right? So I'm like, oh well, good thing I didn't buy that FZ1, you know. So I found one for like $187, and I rounded up all the games that I thought I wanted. What I ended up with in my cart, in my eBay cart, was a 3DO console which came with the controller and all the cables and 9 games. All right, and I was pretty made up in my mind, man. These are gonna be this, you know, this is it. This is it for me. And the 9 games is, of course, the games that you saw that I showed earlier in the video. But I'm like, this is it. This is all I need. So I tallied up here for you guys, as you can see on the screen, what I spent on my early 3DO experience. All right, just a console and 9 games. $656. Well, this is give or take a couple dollars. $656.74. $656.74. When I and mind you, this is after I had already pressed the purchase button, so all of these were already on their way, being shipped to my location. I tallied this up afterwards, and I was like, motherfucker, $656.74 from the guy who was not willing to spend $450 for 21 games and a console with 3 controllers. You know, and I'm not gonna lie to you, this broke my heart when I saw it. I'm like, you pig, you selfish pig. You had to go and spend more money. You had to go. And because I was so confident, man, I was so confident that I was about to spend less money. I was so confident that I was gonna end up with, like, what? At most $400. Convinced that I was just gonna spend that much money. But ends up spending about like $200 more. But it is what it is at the end of the day, you know, it is what it is.